Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. By 1941, the British government was well aware that a Japanese attack on their Asian colonial possessions, such as Malaya and Burma, was highly likely. The Dutch government in exile, which controlled the East Indies, a large source of crude oil, shared similar concerns. However, both European powers had limited options to prevent a determined Japanese invasion. In terms of air power, both Britain and the Netherlands relied heavily on the Brewster Buffalo as their primary fighter aircraft. While the story of the Buffalo in Dutch service will be explored in another video, this one focuses on its role with the RAAF. The Brewster Buffalo was one of those aircraft that quickly became outdated, often appearing on lists of the worst fighters of World War II. Originally designed as a carrier-based fighter, it entered service with the US Navy in December 1939. The F-2A-3 variant was powered by a 1200 horsepower Wright Cyclone air-cooled engine, achieving a top speed of 321 miles per hour, or 517 kilometers per hour, and was armed with four 12.7mm machine guns. Despite being inferior to the latest British and German fighters, the Buffalo was in high demand due to the scarcity of modern combat aircraft at the time. The British first ordered Brewster Buffaloes in 1939, initially receiving a batch of 32 airframes, originally destined for Belgium. In 1940, they purchased an additional 170 under the export designation B339E, which the RAF officially called the Buffalo Mark I. This export version had a less powerful engine compared to the US Navy's version, and although pleasant to fly, it was deemed unsuitable for the European theater due to poor high-altitude performance, engine overheating, and other issues. The Buffaloes were eventually deployed to the Far East. This decision was partly based on intelligence suggesting that British pilots would primarily face outdated Japanese fighter types, such as the Ki-27. This assessment wasn't entirely incorrect, as the Ki-27 did form the bulk of the Japanese order of battle in the Malayan campaign. And even the more modern Ki-43 wasn't decisively superior to the Buffalo. On the other hand, the famous A6M-0 had flown combat missions in China since September 1940 with amazing success, and it should have been noticed by Allied intelligence. There was also a level of racial prejudice involved, but the reality was that Spitfires and Hurricanes were desperately needed in both the domestic theater and North Africa, leaving few to spare for other fronts. In the end, their deployment wouldn't have made a difference. A total of 167 Buffaloes were assigned to the Far East, arriving in Singapore in the spring of 1941 to provide air defense for Malaya, Singapore, and Burma. These aircraft were distributed among 5 RAF and Commonwealth squadrons. At the outbreak of the war, 1 Royal Air Force, 1 Royal Australian Air Force, and 1 Royal New Zealand Air Force squadron with 50 Buffaloes between them were deployed to Klang Airfield in Singapore. The 21 Royal Australian Air Force Squadron was based at Sungai Petani in northwest Malaya, while the 67th Squadron RAF was sent to Burma. Many of the airframes were stored due to a lack of manpower, and at least 20 were lost in training accidents by the fall of 1941. Most pilots were inexperienced, particularly with monoplane fighters. New Zealand pilot, Flight Sergeant Jeff Friskin, who would become the most successful Buffalo pilot outside Finland, found the airplane easy to fly and land, enjoying aerobatics in it. However, he noted that it climbed like a brick, taking 15 to 20 minutes to reach 15,000 feet. Friskin believed the Buffalo needed at least 300 more horsepower to effectively engage Japanese aircraft. His opinion of the airplane was more favorable than that of most other pilots, however. On the night of December 7–8, 1941, the Japanese invasion fleet approached the northeast coast of Malaya. The first Allied aircraft to engage the enemy were Australian Hudson bombers. Two were shot down by anti-aircraft defenses, but all 3 Japanese transport ships were reportedly hit. One of them eventually sank. (243) Squadron had a small detachment at Kotabaru Airfield. 2 Buffaloes were ordered to attack landing barges on the Kelantan River and the Japanese beachhead. The first action for the Buffalo in the campaign resulted in 1 aircraft being damaged by ground fire, forcing the pilot to return to base. Pilot Officer Shields remained alone and spotted some Japanese Ki-21 bombers. While pursuing them at 9,000 feet, he saw another aircraft 2,000 feet below. Catching up, he opened fire from about 350 yards. However, his visibility was poor due to an oily windshield, and another common Buffalo issue soon manifested: machine gun jamming. All 4 machine guns jammed after 2 bursts, forcing Shields to break away and return to base. Around the same time, on the other side of the Malayan Peninsula at Sungai Petani, the 21 Royal Australian Air Force Squadron was warned of incoming aircraft from the west. 2 Buffalo sections were placed on readiness, but no aircraft were scrambled. 10 minutes later, a formation of Ki-21 Sallies from the 98th Sentai was spotted at 11,000 feet. Two pilots were already strapped into their Buffaloes as the Japanese bombers released their bombs on the airfield. Flight Lieutenant Bob Kirkman and Flying Officer John Hooper took off through bursting bombs and eventually caught up with the bombers, attempting an attack. Once again, the Buffalo machine guns failed. The raid destroyed 2 Buffaloes and damaged 5 more, along with 2 Blenheims. Other airfields were attacked as well. British airfields in Malaya lacked an effective early warning system or adequate aircraft shelters. Only some airfields had dispersal areas, and their anti-aircraft defense was modest, or in many cases, non-existent. These factors made the Japanese counter-air campaign extremely effective. The 21 RAAF squadron at Sungai Petani was setting up patrols and recon flights, leading to the Buffalo's first encounter with Japanese fighters. Flying Officer Hooper was on perimeter patrol when he spotted 7 Ki-21 bombers 2,000 feet above him. He was then attacked by fighter escorts, mistakenly identified as Zeros but likely Ki-43 Oscars. 6 enemy fighters surrounded Hooper, but he managed to escape with a split-ass maneuver. The Japanese formation was heading for another airfield, so the Oscars left him alone. Flight Lieutenant Kinnimont and Sergeant Norm Chapman were sent to look for possible landings at Singora. Upon arrival, they were intercepted by a dozen fixed undercarriage fighters identified as Navy 96s, but they were actually Army Ki-27s, probably from the 11th Sentai. Kinemon recalled the sky being full of red circles with all the Japanese trying to shoot at them. He managed to fire a burst at one of them without aiming properly and then dived to escape. While escaping, Kinemon fired a burst at an HK-6 flying boat, but missed. One Ki-27 was more persistent, following Kinemon to low level, but he avoided its fire and eventually escaped. The pilots of the 11th Sentai claimed 2 Buffaloes shot down, but both actually returned to base. Another raid on Sungai Patani occurred mid-morning, involving Ki-21s at 1200 feet. This raid was devastating, leaving No. 21 Squadron with only 4 undamaged Buffaloes. The squadron was soon ordered to withdraw to Butterworth, which had also been attacked. The 243 Squadron detachment was withdrawn as the Japanese were about to capture their airfield at Kotabaru. The first day of the attack was disastrous for British and Commonwealth forces, but things would only get worse. This concludes the first part of the Brewster Buffalo story in Malaya. December 8, 1941 marked the grim day for British and Commonwealth forces in Malaya. The Japanese army seized the crucial airfield at Kotabaru and dealt heavy blows to British and Commonwealth bomber and fighter units. At 10:40 a.m., 2 of the remaining Buffaloes, flown by flying officers Jeff Shepard and Daryl Sproul, were sent on a reconnaissance mission across the Thai border. There, they spotted a column of 12 to 15 Japanese light tanks. Remarkably, a soldier in the column waved the Japanese flag, apparently mistaking the Buffaloes for friendly aircraft. This confusion likely allowed the 2 Australian pilots to attack the column without drawing anti-aircraft fire. Shortly after, they also attacked the transport column, claiming 4 trucks destroyed. Despite suffering heavy losses, the RAAF was still able to mount an attack on the Japanese-occupied airbase at Singora in Thailand. RAAF's 34 and 60 squadrons combined forces, sending 6 Bristol Blenheim bombers, both Mark 1s and Mark 4s, represented here by the newer variant, to strike the crowded airfield. The British bombers, flying without escort, were met by fierce Japanese fighter opposition. Although they managed to drop their bombs, the RAF crews couldn't clearly observe the results of their attack. Japanese Ki-27 fighters from the 1st and 11th Sentai intercepted the bombers, claiming to have shot down 5. Two of these claims were made by Naoharu Shiromoto, an ace with 11 victories. In reality, 3 Blenheims were lost. Even so, the RAF planned another raid on Singora, which continued to launch frequent Japanese attacks. This time, 4 Buffaloes from RAAF's 21 Squadron were assigned as escorts. The fighters were piloted by Flight Lieutenants Richard McKenney, Fred Williams, Max White, and Flying Officer Harold Montefiore. After reaching the rendezvous point and circling for at least 40 minutes, the Buffalo pilots were forced to abort the mission and return to base. The bombers never appeared. Meanwhile, the Blenheims were caught on the ground during another Japanese attack, and all but one were destroyed. As the Buffaloes returned from their aborted escort mission, they were attacked. Flight Lieutenant Williams later recalled being swarmed by a horde of Zeros. However, this is unlikely. The attackers could have been Ki-43 Oscars, which Allied pilots often confused with the more famous Navy fighter. I could only find evidence of the fixed landing gear Ki-27s being involved, however. A chaotic dogfight erupted. Williams struggled with poor visibility. Grease from his machine gun rounds had smeared his windscreen. At one point, he nearly shot down his comrade McKenney, but radios worked this time, and McKenney managed to warn him. Both Williams and McKenney decided to break off and land at Butterworth. On the ground, they saw another large formation of Japanese bombers and fighters approaching, but the ground crew was in shelters, and the refueling hoses were padlocked. Despite being nearly out of fuel and unable to fill up their tanks, Williams and McKenney took off again. They managed to engage the bombers right over the airstrip, but at least 3 escorting fighters, again reported as Zeros, pursued the Buffaloes. The 2 pilots split up. McKenney was quickly shot down over the sea. He bailed out, suffering severe facial burns, but was eventually rescued. Flight Lieutenant Williams now faced 3 Japanese fighters, which he again identified as Zeros. After a while, his machine guns jammed, forcing him to disengage and attempt a landing. Some Japanese fighters followed, but Williams led them through anti-aircraft fire, causing them to pause their attack. As Williams came into land, his fuel tanks finally ran dry, and he was forced to make a dead stick landing. He jumped out and dashed to a bunker just before the Japanese fighters strafed and destroyed his Buffalo on the ground. Meanwhile, the other 2 Buffaloes, flown by Flight Lieutenant Max White and Flying Officer Harold Montefiore, remained airborne, locked in a desperate fight. Montefiore managed to hit the Japanese fighter, claiming a Zero shot down. This was likely 12th Victory Ace, Sergeant Major Tokuyasu Ishizuka of the 11th Sentai, who force-landed his Ki-27. Ishizuka claimed 2 enemy aircraft shot down in the battle, and after his forced landing, managed to evade capture. This marked the first victory claim for Buffalo pilots in the Malayan campaign. However, Montefiore was shot down just minutes later. He bailed out and landed safely. The only Buffalo to survive was flown by Flight Lieutenant White, though his aircraft was badly damaged. White managed the forced landing on Penang Island's airstrip. Despite the damage, his Buffalo was considered repairable. If the first day of war was tough for the RAAF and Commonwealth forces in Malaya, the second day proved even harsher. Number 21 Royal Australian Air Force Squadron was evacuated from Butterworth to Ipoh, with only 2 Buffaloes left. The Buffalo pilots had claimed their first confirmed victory, matched by a known Japanese loss, but they also suffered their first air combat casualties. The Blenheim force in northern Malaya was decimated. From an original 47 airframes, only 10 remained, and just 2 were operational. The Japanese invaders continued their advance, but the campaign was far from over. On December 10, 1941, came the biggest shock of the campaign for the British. 2 major warships, HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse, were sunk by Japanese aircraft. This dramatic event has been covered on other channels, so we won't go into detail here. Multiple factors led to this outcome, including a lack of proper coordination between the Royal Navy and the RAF. That meant the warships had no air cover. The Buffaloes only arrived after the attack, catching sight of the Prince of Wales just before she slipped beneath the waves. After this, there was a lull in aerial operations as the RAF tried to regroup in the south, while the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force deployed their aircraft to newly captured airfields like Kota Baru. The 11th Sentai brought in their Ki-43s, and soon more bombers like the Ki-48 and Ki-51 began appearing in force. The speed of the Japanese deployment surprised the British and Commonwealth commanders, though the availability of large amounts of intact fuel on captured airfields certainly helped the invaders. Despite this, the Japanese kept up the pressure on RAF airfields and other targets. On December 12th, Penang Island was hit hard by airstrikes from Ki-48s and Ki-51s. In response, Air Chief Marshal Brooke sent additional Buffaloes to Ipoh. RAF 243 Squadron, consisting mostly of pilots from New Zealand, contributed 4 fighters from Singapore, attaching them to number 21 Squadron. On December 13th, Penang was attacked again, prompting headquarters in Singapore to order 16 Buffaloes from the RAAF 453 Squadron to deploy to Butterworth Airfield, from which Buffaloes left just days earlier. The plan was to send them in 2 flights of 3 aircraft and 2 flights of 5. The first flight, led by Flight Lieutenant Vanderfield, took off from Singapore at 6 a.m., intending to refuel at Butterworth before a reconnaissance mission, but there was no time to refuel. They were immediately sent to intercept another attack on Penang, this time by 3 Ki-48s and 18 Ki-51s. The Buffaloes scrambled from Butterworth and climbed towards cloud cover as the Japanese bombers focused on attacking ships. Vanderfield faced a major challenge. His landing gear wouldn't retract. Despite this, he led Sergeants Bill Collier and Mac Reed into the fight. The Australian pilots, unfamiliar with Japanese aircraft, identified the Ki-48s as Mitsubishis and the Ki-51s as Japanese Stukas. Vanderfield attacked the twin-engine Ki-48s at about 7,000 feet, quickly shooting one down and sending it flaming into the sea. No parachutes were seen. Then 6 Ki-51s appeared from the clouds and went after the Buffaloes. Vanderfield pressed on, downing another Ki-48. Japanese records confirmed the loss of 2 such aircraft, including one flown by Captain Kunimi Hota, acting CEO of the 75th Sentai. Meanwhile, Collier and Reed turned their attention to the Ki-51s. In the ensuing dogfight, Reed claimed 2 victories, while Collier claimed another. Again, Japanese records confirmed the loss of 2 Ki-51s. The Japanese formation was unescorted, but after reporting the Buffalo attack, 5 Ki-43s from the 59th Sentai were dispatched to help. They arrived too late to save the bombers, but strafed Butterworth Airfield, claiming 4 fighters destroyed. Collier and Reed had just landed, but their Buffaloes weren't damaged. Likely, the targets were aircraft damaged beyond repair in previous attacks. On the return flight, Major Tanimura, CO of the 59th Sentai, collided with his wingman and was killed. But accidents soon took a toll on the Buffalo pilots too. A flight from Singapore led by Wing Commander Leonard Neal with pilot officers Tom Livesey and David Brown was forced off course by bad weather. Low on fuel, Livesey tried to land in what he thought was a wheat field, but it was a rice paddy and his Buffalo flipped over. Despite cracked ribs, he managed to get out. The other 2 weren't as fortunate. Neal attempted a belly landing but hit a tree and was killed when the plane exploded. Brown also hit trees and died in the crash. The flight had ended up on the Sumatran coast, across the Malacca Strait, and Dutch authorities helped Livesey return to Singapore. Other flights did make it to Butterworth, but a large formation of 25 to 30 Ki-27s from the 1st and 11th Sentai was spotted nearby. Flight Lieutenant Vigors recalls taking off immediately after landing without even refueling. He was joined by Sergeant O'Mara. The 2 attacked from above and behind a cloud, with Vigors aiming for the center of the formation. He believed he scored some hits, but as he put it, things were too hot to bother about the score. Vigors quickly realized how maneuverable the Japanese fighters were, and his Buffalo took a direct hit to the fuel tank. With fuel exploding in his face, he bailed out from about 10,000 feet. As he descended, Japanese pilots tried to shoot him, but luckily they missed. The Japanese approach was very different from the Allied one. They often saw nothing wrong with firing on a parachuting pilot, since he could return to fight again. Despite the close call, Vigors survived, though badly burned and wounded in the thigh. He was rescued by 2 Malayans after spending the night on top of a hill. Sergeant O'Mara's Buffalo was damaged, but he managed to escape and make a forced landing. Flight Lieutenant Grace also took off to face the Ki-27s, but was attacked at about 700 feet of altitude. He managed to shoot down a Ki-27 before his own Buffalo was damaged, forcing him to land at Ipoh.
One Japanese Ki-27 pilot, Lieutenant Tomoichiro Fujisaki of the 1st Sentai, was indeed killed during this engagement, and he could be Grace's victim. Two more pilots, Pilot Officer Jeff Angus and Sergeant Ron Elrich, were refueling when the enemy appeared and had to scramble individually. Angus took off first, but was attacked by two Japanese fighters. He was hit on the first pass, then wounded on the second, but managed to escape and make a forced landing in a paddy field. Despite continued attacks, he escaped further injury. Elrich wasn't so lucky. He was attacked immediately after takeoff, twice leading his pursuers across the airfield's Bofors gunfire. Eventually, his Buffalo was shot down and Elrich was killed. The squadron diarist noted the lesson: never take off with enemy aircraft overhead. Despite starting the day with several successful shootdowns of Japanese bombers, December 13, 1941 turned out to be even worse than previous days for the defenders of Malaya. 3 pilots were killed, another was seriously injured, and multiple aircraft were lost. The Japanese wasted no time, rapidly deploying their units to newly captured airfields. This allowed them to keep up the pressure on the RAAF. At Al-Star, the Japanese found the airfield almost completely intact, along with a massive bomb dump and 1,000 drums of high-octane fuel. Within hours, they were launching combat missions using the very fuel and bombs left behind. Their next target, Ipoh, in central Malaya. At Ipoh, 2 RAAF squadrons, number 453 and number 21, were technically present, but on December 13th, they could barely keep 2 Buffaloes between them ready for action, while more were being prepped for offensive operations. The following morning, December 14th, 5 pilots were sent out to strafe a reported Japanese column near Al-Star. Flight Lieutenant White and Flying Officer Montefiore of 21 Squadron led 3 pilots from 453 Squadron. However, Montefiore and his wingman became separated from the others in the clouds and had to return to base. Flight Lieutenant White, along with Sergeant Seago and Board, pressed on. They found the Japanese column and attacked, but soon encountered 3 Ki-51 Sonya light bombers from the 27th Sentai en route to raid Ipoh airfield. A fierce low-level dogfight broke out. Flight Lieutenant Max White was the first casualty. His Buffalo was shot down and he was killed, likely hit by a rear gunner from the Ki-51 he was attacking. But the Australians weren't done yet. Sergeant Board swooped down just above the treetops, got on the tail of one of the Japanese dive bombers, and opened fire at close range. He reported seeing the enemy plane erupt into a massive fireball and crash into the jungle. Sergeant Seago attacked another bomber, watching pieces fly off it before it managed to escape. He then strafed the Japanese column. Despite being hit in the shoulder by the ground fire, Seago made it back to Epoch, protected by Sergeant Board. The loss of one Buffalo was quickly offset by the arrival of 3 more from Butterworth, made airworthy thanks to the tireless efforts of the ground crews. The maintenance teams at Epoch were working around the clock, with all repairs for both squadrons handled by No. 21 Squadron. But manpower shortages meant persistent problems, like the Buffalo's notoriously unreliable machine guns couldn't be fully addressed. Early on December 15th, more reinforcements were sent from Singapore, 7 Buffaloes led by squadron leader Olshorn. Bad weather scattered the formation, forcing 5 pilots to turn back. One crash-landed in a paddy field, but thankfully escaping serious injury. Olshorn and Flight Lieutenant Kinnimont pushed on, eventually spotting a small emergency field at Port Swettenham through a break in the clouds. Kinnimont's Buffalo nosed over on landing and was heavily damaged. The Buffalo's machine gun issues surfaced again later that morning, when 3 Buffaloes, flown by Flight Lieutenant Vanderfield and Sergeants Greg Board and Matt O'Mara, intercepted 19 Ki-48 bombers. Vanderfield had previously shot down 2 of the Lily bombers, even with his landing gear refusing to retract. But this time his guns jammed, leaving him unable to inflict any damage. Board and O'Mara also faced firepower problems, but still managed to share a bomber kill. Board recalled holding his dive until the bomber filled his gun sight, then watching it burst into flames as it plummeted to earth. Enemy fighters soon appeared, but Board managed to escape into the clouds. Meanwhile, Buffer's gunners on the ground claimed 2 more bombers. Japanese records, however, only acknowledged the loss of 1 Ki-48, blaming bad weather. Their gunners claimed to have shot down 2 Buffaloes, but in reality, all 3 pilots made it back safely. The Japanese were also struggling with the weather. After attacking Butterworth Airfield, 2 Ki-43s and 3 Ki-51s crash-landed. On December 15th, the Japanese Army Aviation reported their losses since the start of the Malayan campaign. The report included losses to accidents and weather: 15 Ki-21 Sallies, 11 Ki-27 Nates, 10 Ki-43 Oscars, 5 Ki-48 Lilies, and 12 assorted reconnaissance and Army cooperation aircraft. By December 17th, Japanese attacks on Epoch were ramping up. That morning, a standing patrol of 3 Buffaloes was airborne when 3 Ki-43s from the 59th Sentai began strafing the airfield. The Australian pilots couldn't bring down any Oscars, and 2 of their less experienced pilots were shot up. Each claimed to have damaged an enemy, but the Japanese overclaimed heavily, reporting they had fought 6 Buffaloes, shot down 2, and strafed 7 bombers. It was becoming clear that defending Epoch Airfield was a losing battle. There was only one landing strip, and the dispersal pens were far from the runway, connected by narrow taxi tracks. There was also no effective early warning system. Observers were posted, but had to rely on unreliable old phone lines, making their warnings only moderately effective. On the evening of December 18th, Japanese troops overran the observers' positions, and the order was given to evacuate the remaining buffaloes to Kuala Lumpur. By the evening of the 19th, Ipoh was abandoned, this time with the airstrip properly demolished. After trying to halt the Japanese advance from the Ipoh airfield, Buffalo pilots received the order to retreat further south. The main effort shifted to Kuala Lumpur, where the remaining aircraft and pilots regrouped. Other bases already abandoned by the RAAF quickly fell into Japanese hands. While the evacuation of Ipoh was organized, mistakes from earlier in the campaign were repeated at Sungai Petani, Butterworth, and Taiping. Once again, the Japanese found intact stores of fuel and bombs, jokingly nicknaming these captured bases Churchill aerodromes. Kuala Lumpur Airfield, originally the home of the local flying club, had only a single runway and no dispersal areas. All aircraft were forced to stay near the runway, making them easy targets for Japanese attacks. While an operations room and warning system were being set up, neither was ready in time. The Japanese wasted no time targeting Kuala Lumpur. The first raid hit on December 21st, right after the Buffalo Morning Patrol landed. 14 Ki-51 and Ki-48 bombers, escorted by a dozen Ki-43s from the 59th Sentai, attacked, but caused little damage. But the next attack came quickly. This time, 2 Buffaloes from RAAF 453 Squadron scrambled in time. Sergeant Eric Peterson took off first, followed by Sergeant Ross Lace. As they climbed to about 800 feet, they spotted 3 aircraft Lace described as Japanese Stukas. He watched as Peterson turned to engage. Lace kept climbing, expecting more enemy planes to appear. At 4,000 feet, Lace spotted a formation of Japanese fighters below. He identified them as Navy Zeros and soon found himself completely surrounded, attacked from every direction. His Buffalo was hit repeatedly and flames and smoke began pouring from the engine. Realizing he had no choice, Lace bailed out, but not without difficulty. First, his pistol holster snagged on the canopy, and then, as he parachuted down, Japanese pilots tried to shoot him out of the sky. Luckily, their aim was off this time and Lace landed safely. In reality, the Japanese fighters weren't Zeros but Ki-43 Oscars. They claimed to have shot down 4 Buffaloes, but it's clear they were all firing at Lace's single aircraft. Among the pilots credited with a kill was future 14 Victory ace Hiroshi Onozaki. While the Japanese were busy overclaiming Lace's Buffalo, Sergeant Peterson managed to shoot down 1 bomber and claim 2 probable kills. The supposed Japanese Stukas were actually Ki-51 Sonyas. By evening, more replacement Buffaloes arrived from Singapore. Up to this point, Buffalo pilots flew in small groups, always outnumbered. But on December 22nd at 10 a.m., the entire 453 squadron, a dozen Buffaloes, took off from Kuala Lumpur led by Flight Lieutenant Vanderfield. Climbing to 7,000 feet, they spotted the enemy. Despite launching their largest group yet, the Buffaloes were again outnumbered. The squadron diary notes they first encountered Navy Zeros. A dogfight broke out, and then another dozen Japanese aircraft appeared, identified as Zeros and Messerschmitt 109s. The battle quickly turned chaotic, and the Buffalo formation was scattered. Other types, including Ki-27 fighters and Ki-48 and Ki-51 bombers, were also reported in the fight. Sergeant Harry Griffiths recalled seeing 20 enemy aircraft, announcing he was going to attack, only to be told by squadron leader Harper on the ground that once he was finished with those, there were 20 more flying above the first group. Griffiths claimed 2 shoot-downs, possibly Ki-27s. He fired a burst at one that appeared in front of him, saw it catch fire and spin down. Then he saw another Japanese fighter chasing a Buffalo, probably flown by Sergeant O'Mara. Griffiths fired a deflection shot, hit the enemy, and watched it roll over and dive to the ground. But his own Buffalo was hit immediately after. Two enemy aircraft kept firing until they ran out of ammo. Fuel spilled from a ruptured tank, but miraculously didn't ignite. Griffiths tried to lead them into the airfield anti-aircraft fire, but they broke off. The gunners, mistaking Griffiths for an enemy, opened fire on him as well, but he landed safely, wounded, with 70 holes in his Buffalo. As Griffiths made his way back across the field, he saw another Buffalo coming in too low. It clipped an embankment and crashed. Rushing to the aid post, Griffiths found no one, so he tracked down a medical officer and had to threaten him to get help for the downed pilot, Pilot Officer Bob Drury, who sadly died of his wounds in hospital. The Buffalo's main opponents in this battle were 18 Ki-43 Oscars from the 64th Sentai, led by Major Tateo Kato. 6 Oscars under Lieutenant Tadao Takayama engaged first. Takayama dove on the Buffaloes, reportedly shooting down 3. His Oscar was allegedly hit by anti-aircraft fire at the start of the battle, and later, both his and a Buffalo flown by Sergeant Mac Reed were seen to explode, likely from a collision as Takayama tried to pull out of a dive, possibly due to a structural failure. Wrinkles and cracks were later found in 6 Ki-43s after the fight. The incident was later depicted as a ramming attack in the 1944 propaganda film Kato Hayabusa Sentotai. Indian soldiers later found Takayama's wrecked Oscar with heavy machine gun holes in the tail, suggesting he was damaged in combat with the Buffaloes. Besides Takayama, credits went to First Lieutenants Yohei Hinoki and Shogo Takeuchi, and Sergeants Yoshito Yasuda and Biyoshi Watanabe. One of the downed pilots was Sergeant Scrimgeour, who bailed out at 10,000 feet over the airfield after a head-on attack with what he thought was a Zero. His Buffalo caught fire, and as he descended, he was fired upon but managed to steer his parachute away from danger. landing safely but suffering burns to his hands and face after losing his goggles and not wearing gloves. The battle lasted about half an hour before the Ki-43s disengaged due to low fuel. The exact moment is unclear. Japanese bombers also joined in, and some were attacked by Buffaloes. Sergeant Greg Board described diving almost vertically on a Mitsubishi bomber, likely a Ki-48, firing until it broke apart and tumbled to earth. Board was credited with the kill. He then spotted a Zero below, but as he prepared to attack, his Buffalo was hit and caught fire. He tried to escape by diving, but had to bail out, landing uninjured in the jungle. Sergeant Clare also claimed Japanese bombers, 2 dive bombers and 1 twin-engine aircraft, though he was credited with just 1 Ki-51. 4 more pilots received probable kills, including Flight Lieutenant Vanderfield, who claimed a Messerschmitt 109 F-type and a Type 97 fighter. In addition to Takayama's wreck, 2 more Japanese aircraft were found. One was burned out, its pilot identified as Major Numo, possibly a Ki-51 downed by Sergeant Clare. Another Rex pilot was reportedly alive, asking his captors to shoot him. The final loss of the day was Sergeant Peterson, who earlier claimed the Ki-51 and 2 probables. Around 3:30 p.m., as the Buffaloes were taxiing for takeoff, 4 Ki-43s from the 59th Sentai swooped in and strafed them. All pilots except Peterson jumped out and took cover. Peterson managed to get airborne, but was shot down and killed. The battle marked the end of Buffalo operations from Malaya. The 7 surviving pilots and 3 remaining operational Buffaloes of 453 Squadron withdrew to Singapore. Like so many airfields before, Kuala Lumpur was evacuated. In just over 2 weeks, the RAAF was driven from mainland Malaya and would continue the fight from Singapore. During this period, Buffalo pilots were credited with destroying 16 enemy aircraft, but 8 Buffalo pilots lost their lives. Despite its many problems, the Buffalo wasn't solely to blame for the loss of Malaya. A better aircraft likely wouldn't have changed the outcome. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the series, and as always, keep watching Showtime 112.